Thank you everyone for joining us for the Lifelong Learning at Home series presented by the Laurier Association for Lifelong Learning. My name is Lindsay Taylor and I'm one of the coordinators for the Lifelong Learning program at Wilfrid Laurier University. For over 20 years, the Laurier Association for Lifelong Learning has been offering unique adult learning opportunities on Laurier's Waterloo and Brantford campuses. Our non-credit courses are intended for personal interest and self-education. Even though we are working from home and maintaining physical distance, we want to acknowledge that Wilfrid Laurier University is located on the Haldimand Tract, traditional territory of the Neutral, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee peoples. In doing this land acknowledgement, we recognize, honor, and respect these nations as the traditional stewards of the lands and water on which Laurier is now present. We do a land acknowledgement as a small act towards reconciliation, and to give us all a moment to reflect on and honor the land and Indigenous presence on this land. We are pleased to offer you this opportunity to learn from your own home and are excited to be joined today by Erin Hodson. Erin is Wilfrid Laurier University's Indigenous Curriculum Specialist. Erin is of Gananage Haga descent and received her M.Ed with a focus on the social and cultural context of education from Brock University in 2017. For almost 10 years, Erin worked for the Tecumseh Center for Aboriginal Research and Education at Brock University, where she created and taught courses focusing on Canadian history through the understanding of Indigenous peoples of Turtle Island. Erin has been involved in multiple research projects investigating the state of Indigenous education in Canada. During her research, Erin has witnessed firsthand the benefits of engaging with Indigenous culture for both her own people's sense of self within mainstream education and for benefit of non-Indigenous people. Erin has been an outspoken advocate for including Indigenous content throughout all levels of education. Since 2017, Erin has been working with faculty, staff, students, and community in the Kitchener-Waterloo area to create authentic space for Indigenous ways of knowing and being into their personal and professional lives. Erin will be presenting the role of allies in Canada's reconciliation, a few thoughts today. We'll get started in a few moments with Erin's lecture, and she'll lecture for about 50 minutes. Following that, we will have a half hour or so for questions. You can send any questions throughout the presentation through the questions function, which you'll see in the GoToWebinar panel on your screen. And any comments or questions for me as the organizer about the platform or any issues you're having can be sent through the chat function, or you can also send them to lall, L-A-L-L, @wlu.ca, and myself or my colleague Jen will be sure to get back to you. So with that, Erin, we will now pass it over to you. Thank you so much again for joining us today. All right, well, Erin, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. I want to, first of all, thank and acknowledge the fine folks from the Laurier Association for Lifelong Learning. Throughout my tenure at the institution, they have been very supportive of the work that I do and giving me as much space within their programming to share knowledge that I have with folks like you. So I am very grateful for both Lindsay and for Jen today. I wanted to do a little bit of a disclaimer before we begin. This presentation that I'm going to be walking you through is something that I created a few years ago, before any of the social movements that we're seeing currently right now. So it's something that is specific to my thoughts through the work that I have done within post-secondary institutions, as somebody who has walked with my culture through my own education. These are some of my own thoughts. So I would like to offer this information to you with that in mind. Okay, so let's see if this will work. I believe it did. Before we begin, I wanted to maybe dissuade some thoughts that you have about this webinar. This is not a how-to guide. I am not going to be giving you a playbook on how to be a good ally. The reason why I'm not going to be doing that is because those things do not exist, unfortunately. It is individualistic to each person, to each instance that you are walking into, and changes day by day. What I'm going to be offering you today is some things that we all need to think about moving forward to ensure that people who live on the margins are given as much support and space as we can offer them in times of difficulty and in times of happiness too. So if you are looking for a playbook, please let go of that thought, but open yourself up to the idea that there are going to be some things that we are going to talk about today that will help you walk through your life from now on. I know that Lindsay already did a land acknowledgement, but every presentation that I do begins with one of these. So the graphic that you're seeing here is from Elsprig, which is a social justice research conglomerate that is loosely affiliated with Laurier. A few years ago, they partnered with the Office of Indigenous Initiatives at Laurier to create their Know the Land campaign. So in conjunction with Indigenous bodies at Laurier, they gathered and compiled and put on their website a whole bunch of information about the land that Laurier sits and surrounding areas. If there's any information that you need about land acknowledgements, that is a really good place to start. And we can make sure that we link stuff out for you as well from there. So they created this wonderful graphic, which says you are here on the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, the neutral peoples. One of the things that I used to like to do pre-quarantine when I was doing these types of presentations in person is this is the part where I would get everyone to stand up. And I would walk them through a little bit of a language lesson about how to say these words. What you're looking at right now is a form of colonial violence. And what I mean by that is these are words that were never meant to be written down in an English alphabet. Most Indigenous people pre-contact on Turtle Island, not all of them, but a vast majority of them did not have written forms of communication like an alphabet. So when Europeans came here, because they had an alphabet system, they utilized their system to impose onto these words, and it doesn't always work out great. So I know that Lindsay today, she shared my traditional nation's name in the language, which is Ganyage Haga. Ganyage Haga actually begins with a K when it is written out in the English language, but it has more of a G sound. So when I do these lectures for people, I like to start by recognizing that, these words have been sort of shoved into a system that doesn't completely express how they're supposed to sound. So if you have a few minutes, I would like you to try to repeat what I'm going to say, and I'm not going to do it how I usually do it, which is a few times of repetition. To say Haudenosaunee, if you're going to say it, it sounds like Haudenosaunee. If you're going to say Anishinaabe, it sounds like Anishinaabe. This seems really strange to do this to my camera. And then obviously neutral, which is not an Indigenous term. It's clearly a Europeanized form of how to acknowledge the people that lived here pre-contact. You may also see it as denoted as Atawandaran, which is what people around here called these people. We don't have a accurate record of what they called themselves. I know that the University of Waterloo uses the term Atawandaran in their land acknowledgement. I'm not sure why Laurier doesn't. I wasn't here when those decisions were made. So we use neutral here. I wanted to move on to this, and it will all come together. I know that this seems rather redundant for some of you, but I promise it will all come together at some point, hopefully. This is a wampum belt. For those of you that don't know, a wampum belt is a visual expression of an agreement between nations. Like I said, many of us did not have written forms of communication. Those of us that did, we didn't all speak the same language. So it was important for us to be able to have ways to communicate with each other that did not utilize written language. So what we came up with was wampum belts. This is made out of a natural product of shell, a type of shell that's, it's called a quahog shell. It has a little bit of purple and a whole bunch of white on it. And people would historically take those shells and carve them into beads and then loom them together to create some sort of a pictorial representation of something. This one here is called the dish with one spoon. It predates European contact in this area in Turtle Island. This one was created between the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe people. Pre-contact, we were two nations, two sovereign nations that didn't really get along. But we still recognized that we had to come together to create an understanding of how we were going to engage with the land around us. And this is what we came up with. We came up with the dish with one spoon. So the purple part in the center is representative of a dish. The white piece in the middle is representative of a spoon or some sort of a utensil that you would feed yourself with. And the way that this is, the knowledge that has been kept in this, it says that there's three parts to the wampum belt that I'm showing you. The first part of the dish with one spoon is only take what you need from the dish, which represents the land that we all have to feed ourselves from. The second part, only take what you need. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. Only take what you need. The second part is leave something for everyone else. Ensure that the people around you can also eat, can also sustain themselves. And the third part is keep the dish, which represents the land, clean. And that's it. As people, as two sovereign nations, we recognize that, making sure that the land was available for the next generation to come and the generation after that and so on was the most important piece. So why am I showing you this? I am showing you this because, first of all, treaties, which is what this is, treaties don't expire, regardless if it is a treaty that has a visual representation like this, or if it is written down with paper and pen. Treaties do not expire. This one has existed on this land since the mid 1100s. We all should at least know what it is and do our best to adhere to it. The second one is this one you might be a little bit more familiar with. This is called the two-row wampum. This one is the first example of a wampum belt that was constructed between Europeans and Indigenous people on Turtle Island. This is probably going to be review for many of you. It was conducted in the early part of the 1600s. Ooh, I might be wrong there. No, it was this early part of the 1600s, and it was constructed with the Dutch in mind. The Dutch and the Haudenosaunee, my ancestors' people, came together to understand how the relationship between us and these newcomers were going to go. And what we constructed was what you're looking at now, which is called the two-row wampum. And what this one says is the one purple part represents Indigenous people and their canoes. The second purple part represents European people in their tall ships, and we all travel down the same river of life, which is the entire thing, not interfering with each other, but living in harmony. The one thing that I remember, and I say this every time because math is not my forte, the one thing that I remember from grade 10 math class is that two parallel lines never intersect. They never run into each other. They never disrupt each other. And when we offered this understanding of the relationship to the Dutch, they were willing to sign on to it. They said, yes, that sounds good. We are going to agree to that. When the when the English came here after that in the mid part of the 1600s, we presented this to the English, and the English said, that sounds great. We will hang on to that too. And then after that, the French signed on to it. So this was not a treaty, and it is a treaty. That was created with a European nation that disappeared from our shores, never to return again. This treaty was constructed with every European power that came here, and everyone knew about it and everyone agreed to it. Didn't exactly go that way, but again, as individuals who benefit from living on this land, the least that we can do is know what happened here before we had the benefit of living here. And that encompasses not just history, but also the political ideology that came along with the relationships. So as moving forward, and there are so many other treaties, so many other wampum belts. If it's something that you're interested in, start Googling. There's quite a few wampum belts that exist all over Turtle Island. And there's a lot of really interesting history that goes along with them. This next one, and I'm sure many of you have seen this. This is a map of the Haldimand Tract. And I'm going to choke on my water for a moment. Pardon me. So the Haldimand Tract is a piece of land that was given to the Mohawk people of the Six Nations Confederacy. Of course, this is happening now while I'm trying to do this for a whole bunch of really lovely people. Please give me one more moment. The Haldimand Tract was a piece of land that was given, and we're going to unpack what given means in a moment, to the Mohawk people of the Six Nations Confederacy in their in remuneration for their support in the Revolutionary War with the 13 colonists. So I'm sure you all remember this. You know, when the 13 colonists went to war with the British didn't have enough physical manpower in North America to be able to win this war. They were also fighting another war on their own continent, which was called the 100 Years' War. So they went to my people. They went to the Mohawk people of the Six Nations Confederacy, and they said, "Hey, can you guys, you know, come in and fight this war with us?" And for better or worse, my people said yes. Didn't go so well. English sort of didn't fare as well as they were hoping to. And when they moved up to what we now know as Southern Ontario, my people's traditional land was in the Finger Lakes region of upstate New York. That's where our physical homes were. And they were dotted in many other places, but the largest sort of group of us that was our traditional homeland. And we said to the English, like, "Hey guys, can't really stay here anymore. Kind of fought a war with you, and you lost, and now we're living in this area that is now for the people that we fought against." So the British said, "Come with us. We will give you," and I'm pointing to my screen, but you can't see it. "We will give you 6 miles on either side of the Grand River from its source to its mouth to be your new homeland." So this land, which is 950 square acres of land, runs through Kitchener, Waterloo, Cambridge, Brantford, and every single little hamlet and town all the way through from the source to the mouth of the Grand River. Today, less than 5%, which is the orange piece at the bottom, less than 5% is left in Mohawk hands because of things like misappropriation of funds, outright theft, shady backdoor deals, and then finally, the final nail in the coffin was the reserve system, which forced Indigenous people onto small plots of land that were segregated from the rest of society. The reason I show you this is because, again, it's to share the information. We all need to know how we got to where we are and what that means for the people that were there before. The first step to reconciliation, the first step to allyship, the first step to creating sustainable change within the systemic structures that exist in this country is to first know the real, whole, sometimes not pretty truth of how we all got here and acknowledge it. So one of the things that I think that is my job, part of my job as the Indigenous Curriculum Specialist, is to give time to the small amount of time that I get to interact with people to ensure that every time I do it, I go over these things. Because there might be people out there that have never heard of it before, and it might sort of stir something in them that they need to know more. I wanted to tell you a quick story before I begin, because it really has sort of shaped the way that I, see my role as an Indigenous Curriculum Specialist, as somebody who has decided to spend my career working within post-secondary institutions, trying to move the needle a little bit. First of all, the photo that you are seeing is the first pair of moccasins that my father ever made me. I actually still have them. Weirdly, they're right here. They are adorable. He made them himself, and I love them. And they were sitting on my desk one day, and I took a picture of it, and I thought, oh, I'm going to start using that in my presentations because it's really cute. In a previous life, before I got this job, I was an instructor at Brock University. I taught a few classes, like Lindsay mentioned in my bio, on pre-Confederation and post-Confederation Indigenous history in Canada. And as a new instructor, as somebody who was trying very hard to do everything right, I was very prepared. I ensured that I had thought of everything. I had binders and papers and folders and sticky things on things, and to ensure that I was the most prepared person I could be to do this job. And the term went well. The semester went great. The students were fantastic. We created a wonderful learning community together. And on the last day, a student came up to me, a non-Indigenous student, and with tears in her eyes, she said to me, "What am I supposed to do with all of this?" And I had never thought of that before. I was so busy being concerned about doing it correctly that I hadn't thought about what it was that I expected individuals to do with the information that I was giving to them, except for just no more. Um, and I don't remember what I said to her. I think I gave her some, blah, 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 blah. And I just sort of word vomit came out of my mouth about what I thought that she should do. But I sat with that for the summer because it was a winter term class. I sat with it for the summer and I thought, what is it that I really want people to do with this? Why am I doing this work? And what I came up with was this list. This was the actual slide that I used on the very last day every time I taught from then on out. At that point, because it was quite a while ago, I'm gonna date myself here, but I believe it was anywhere between 6 and 10 years ago at this point. I didn't really have the words to know that what I was talking about was allyship. Allyship, at least on my radar, was not something that people were really sort of talking about as much, and being an ally wasn't really in people's vocabulary. But this is what I pulled together. This is what I wanted people to do with the information that I was giving to them. I wanted them to request Indigenous content in their classes. I always assumed that would be a really great way to ensure that not only were students learning something, but that instructors were learning something as well. Write Indigenous realities into their papers. Again, not only are students going to learn something, but the professors who are going to be grading those papers need to find out if the information is correct, so they would have to learn. Be that annoying person. What I meant by that was to be that person that every time you were at a party or at a dinner thing, or for students, if you're home with your parents and content, people are saying things that are fundamentally untrue, that you are that annoying person that says, well, actually, that's not true, and here's the truth. Think critically about what it is that is being presented to you in social media, in the media, by your family, by your friends, in culture in general. Get involved where and when you can. There are ways for many individuals to get involved in reconciliation, whether it is in a small way or in a larger way, whether it is behind the scenes or in front. There are many ways to be an ally and to push the idea of reconciliation further in this country. And it begins with educating yourself. Continue to educate yourself. And I think that this is a really a good place to say this, is that your education does not end with your formative education. I think one of the things that many of us have realized, particularly under the understanding of Indigenous histories and knowledge and culture, is that we never got taught that in school. Somebody who was, as somebody who was educated in Canada my entire life, not once was I ever educated about residential schools. I always knew about them because it's my family, my community, and my cultural history, but I was never formally taught about them. We cannot rely on our education to ensure that we are getting the knowledge that we need to be the best citizens of this world that we can. And that knowledge, that education never ends. And I think that you folks are a really good testament to that, wherein you are, using every bit of your time that we have in this world to continue to educate yourselves. So I give you thanks for that. And then finally, be an advocate. Advocate for change. Use the agency and the privilege and the power that comes your way, however it comes your way, to speak to people about what what it is that you would like to see, which is systemic change in our country when it comes to the lives of Indigenous people. So this is what I came up with. And I'm really glad I did, because it really, honestly, my first year teaching, it just was not on my radar. And it wasn't until I had a student actually ask me that I even began to think about it. So I like to share this slide only because I think, first of all, it shows my learning curve. But it also shows that these things have not changed. These are still the things that Indigenous people need in order to achieve equity within this society. So we still have work to do. So these are, again, when I talk about this sort of stuff, this is my own thoughts. This is collections of my own ideas and my own thoughts and uh, my own history of what I have as, you know, an Indigenous person through public school, high school, my undergraduate, my graduate work within a multitude of different jobs. These are the things that I have seen. So what does allyship mean? These are things that I think has sort of changed a little bit in recent time. To me, allyship means, again, using the privilege and the agency that you individually come to be able to share the realities of people that don't have as much privilege and agency. There has been a lot of stuff in the news recently about what non-BIPOC, which is Black, Indigenous, people of color, want from, you know, from the rest of society in terms of allyship. To me, that, you know, it's a fluid thing, and it all begins with listening and with learning. How do we work at allyship? Well, allyship is a continuous work. It's not something that you check a box and you're done for the rest of your life. It's something that you continuously push at. And I've got some information later on about, you know, the good, the bad, the ugly, but, you know, it's something that you continuously work at, and you're not always going to get right, and that's okay. The thing that you should always continuously try to do is do better. And then, you know, why do we align ourselves with Indigenous people? This one is particularly around reflecting on your motivations. Why are you looking to lend your privilege and your agency to Indigenous people? Is it for selfish reasons? Is it to make yourself feel better? Is it because you feel as though you have a debt to pay? Is it because you frankly just know that it's the right thing to do? Reflecting on your motivations as to why you wish to work to be an ally is fundamental to that practice. It's not always easy. Reflection, individual reflection and internal reflection is a very uncomfortable thing to do sometimes. And it can be a bit of a whirling circus sometimes, but it really is fundamental to this work, is to ensure that you are doing it for the right reasons. Because if you are not, you can do some serious damage. I wanted to, and these resources will be made available to you. I'm going to try not to choke while I drink this time. References to, I made it. References to these two pieces that I'm going to show you will be available to you, so you can take a look at them after. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with them. This first one was put out by the Office of Indigenous Initiatives at Laurier. It is the Indigenous Allyship Toolkit. It's great. There's a lot of really fantastic information in there. I pulled out some of the, again, I'm pointing at my screen like you can see what I'm pointing at. I pulled out some of the key, what I think is the key pieces for, you know, a 50-minute presentation. What they say is allyship is a relationship of respect. And that goes back to that, you know, need of reflexivity, to ensure that you are reflecting on why you're doing this. And if you don't come up with, you know, a relational piece that is, you know, first of all, true relational, where there's give and take on both sides, but also that respect piece, then you need to reevaluate what it is that you are doing. They say that reconciliation of historical and contemporary wrongdoings and rectification, I apologize, and the rectification of those inequitable colonial systems are at the heart of being an ally. I will let you know that this resource is very sort of academic in its speech, and I'm going to show you one that's a little bit more accessible in its speech in a minute, and it says basically the same thing. This resource says it is a continuous process of self-reflection. Active engagement in the colonizing process has to be engaged with. It has to be a continuous fight, because we live in a colonized system, and unless we are really willing to take a look at those systems and really try to make some sort of a change, even though it might mean that, you know, we don't get to, you know, do all of the things that we wanted to do before, it's still important. And it finally says Allyship requires one to constantly cast a critical eye on themselves and to reevaluate how they are choosing to live and to carry themselves, and to think about how their lifestyle and choices, directly or indirectly, impact Indigenous people. And then finally, it talks about the ally label. And I wanted to sort of talk about this for a moment. At least in my understanding of what allyship is, the label ally is really not something that can be taken by someone. It has to be bestowed upon you. You know, somebody who is an ally to one community might not be an ally to the other community, because it's that relational piece. You know, it's very much like, you know, you don't call yourself that, it's somebody else saying that you are that, if that makes any sense to you. It's not a label, a pin that you put on proudly to walk around. It's something that is it should be very humbling to have somebody call you an ally, because it means something very specific to that person, and it's something that should be constantly worked towards. This is very strange for me, because this is the point where I would say, are there any questions? And I'm sure there are questions coming in, but I can't see them right now. And we will get to them in a moment. I'm missing that relational piece with people. So this is the second one that I was indicating toward. This was created out of Montreal. And it says basically the same stuff that ours does. It just it says it in a little bit more of a condensed version. This is more like a pamphlet, wherein ours is an actual sort of, you know, booklet. So in the Indigenous Ally Toolkit here, it says being an ally is about disrupting oppressive spaces by educating others on the realities and histories of marginalized people. So when we're talking about marginalized people, we're not just, you know, talking about, you know, obviously my specialization is indigeneity, but we're not just talking about Indigenous people when it comes to the systemic erasure of marginalized people. There are many marginalized people in this country that experience erasure and persecution because of the color of their skin, because of their sexual orientation, because of their sexual expression, you know, all of these things, because of their religious affiliation. And those are the things that we really need to start looking toward. However, because of my specialization, I'm simply talking about, you know, my ideas of my culture at this point. They say the term of ally has lost its original meaning. Instead of being used to identify one's role within a collective struggle, it has come to symbolize a token identity, a kind of badge that one would wear to show they are one of the good guys. And this is something that I think that we, you know, has really been sort of buffed against in the last little while, is, you know, what does, particularly with everything that is happening with the Black Lives Matter movement, you know, you can't just put up a black profile picture on your Instagram or on your Facebook and expect that means that you've done your job. That is a tokenistic thing that is not going to move the needle. If we are looking to enact systemic change, we need to really think about what that means and what that looks like. It is not a self-appointed identity. It's not something that you should really be going around saying, well, I'm an ally, I'm an ally. It's something that other people utilize a term to indicate the work that you have done. And that this identity is shown through action, relations, and recognition by a community or a grouping of people. And again, that goes back to the importance of relational work and embeddedness and authenticity in that relational work and embeddedness. I love this list because I created it in conjunction with a friend of mine who was doing her Master's of Social Work Indigenous Field of Study practicum with me last year. Her name is Shirley Hunter, and she is a dear, dear friend to me. And her and I came up with this list together because I think that this is something that a lot of people want, is sort of like this do's and don't list, right? You want that sort of checklist of, okay, well, I don't do that, so that's a good thing. So we came up with this list, and it's not exhaustive. It was really just something that we sort of came up with on the fly. But I think it does, it can be built upon, obviously, but I think it does a pretty good job. So do make friends. everybody needs more friends. Just because we are in isolation and our sociability, our social distancing is very strict right now, that doesn't mean that you cannot make friends. Do ask questions. Questions are good. Questions are good as long as they come from a place of inquiry. I think one of the things that we have really lost within our society today is the ability to have a conversation, to listen, to understand, as opposed to listening to respond. And I think that that is something that we all would really benefit working toward, is to listen, with all of us, not just with our ears, so that we have something to say afterward. Keep trying, even if it is difficult. We are not always going to make it easy for you because of historical trauma, contemporary trauma, ongoing trauma. You're not always going to be met with the easiest response, but that doesn't mean that you don't keep trying. Use your voice even when it might cause an argument. So when I talk to students about this, the example that I use is, Thanksgiving dinner. Christmas dinner, when you're around your extended family, and there might be very specific ideals that are discussed at the kitchen table. If you know that what someone is saying in those interactive moments is not okay, and that it is contributing to the dis-ease that exists within this country and frankly within this world, feel free to say something. Now, say it in a good way, say it in a way that people can hear. And that is one of the lessons that I received from an elder who used to be my boss, Jean Becker. There's a difference between saying things in a way that you think you need to say them, and then saying things in a way that people can hear. And that is the part where, again, we need to really work on as a community and as a nation and as a world, is to use your voice in a way that people can hear. It took me a very long time to be able to talk about these things in ways that people can hear, because I held a lot of anger and sadness and frustration, which for me, it manifests in tears. When I am very frustrated, when I'm very angry about something, my eyes leak and I have no control over it. And unfortunately, in our society, when particularly a female starts to cry, it's very hard for people to hear. So as long as it's safe for you to say something in a good way so that people can hear you. Be open. Be open to learning, be open to understanding, be open to the answers that people give you. If you ask a question, you might not get the answer that you want. If you ask someone, what can I do to help? And you're looking for some grandiose thing, and really what they need is for you to take the garbage out. That is what they need in that moment, and you need to be able to be open to hear those things. Listen. Listening is a skill. It's not something that comes easily to everyone. And again, listening to understand, not listening to respond. And then practice humility. Humility is a very big thing within many Indigenous communities. I have not had a cough at all in weeks, and now all of a sudden that I'm on with 50 plus people, I can't stop coughing. Humility is very important. Being a humble person means that you're coming at things with a very in a good way, and in a way that means that you're going to do the reflective piece of what it means to ally yourself with Indigenous people. Let's move over to the don't side. The don't side is fun. Don't think you can fix it all. It is not fixable by one person, by two people, by a congregation and a group. This is systemic change that we are talking about that needs to be enacted slowly and mindfully and intentionally. So, as much as you wish you could fix it, you cannot fix it all. So consider letting that idea go. I can't fix it all. You can't fix it all. If it was that easily fixable, we would have fixed it by now. Do not assume culture is the same with everyone. What I mean by that is, and I'll give you a little story, and I am running out of time, so I'm going to be quick. The first year that I moved here, I went to the University of Waterloo's powwow in Waterloo Park. And it was wonderful. I was feeling, it was a beautiful powwow. I love that powwow. It's gorgeous. But I was feeling very out of place because I didn't really know anybody here yet. And I was walking through the vendors area looking at all of the beautiful stuff, because they do, one thing that this powwow does really well is vendors, and I love that. And there was a political party, and I'm going to do my best not to, we're not talking about politics here, but I'm going to do my best not to, I'm going to tread lightly. There was a political party table, and there was buttons that they had been making all day, with a photograph that had been in the news at that point of a political leader who had a headdress on. Now, the reason that person had a headdress on was because they had gone into ceremony with a certain nation and been, given a name, and it was all done on the up and up. So that wasn't the problem. The problem was that, that expression of indigeneity was not from this territory. It was something that was, that was conducted in the West. And when I saw it, I thought to myself, that's not appropriate here. Nobody asked if that was okay. This is not an expression of, the traditional culture that is practiced here. And it made me really uncomfortable. Now, I didn't feel as though it was my place to say anything, because I was new here and I didn't want to, I didn't want to ruffle feathers. I didn't want to be that person at that point. So I just walked away. And a couple of months later, I was talking to a friend of mine who was also Indigenous, who also had just moved here around about the same time I had. And she walked by the table and she said something. She said to the person who was manning that table, did you ask for permission to have these here, to have this visual expression of culture here? And the person said, well, no, I didn't, but it was okay over there. So how come it, in that other province, so how come it's not okay here? Culture changes from nation to nation, from expression to expression, from area to area. So just because you know one thing about one culture doesn't mean that it's going to fly in another culture. The concept of pan-indigeneity within Canada is something that I am very vocal about sort of ending, because it's not all the same. As we walk through this country, we see many different expressions of culture, and we need to create space for the plurality in that. Don't do this for selfish reasons, not going to work out well. Don't tokenize, don't utilize Indigenous people as your token friend to make yourself feel better. I can't begin to tell you how many times within my personal, my professional career, I've been tokenized as an Indigenous person, and oh, look what we have, we're, it's good that we engage with this person. Don't be quick to respond and offer solutions. Again, this goes back to the listening to understand, not listening to respond. When we are telling and talking about our issues and our concerns and the inequity that Indigenous people experience within this culture or this country, we're not doing it because we're expecting a quick answer. These are not fixable things that are going to happen quickly. They are fixable, but again, if they were that easily fixable, we would have fixed them by now. Odds are, if you were offering a solution, we have already tried that. So when you are entering into those spaces, the job of people who are aligning themselves with Indigenous issues is to listen, and then to ask what it is that they can do to support. I wanted to offer this. This was actually something that one of my friends from a million years ago, it came across my Facebook. She had posted this wonderful piece here that says, "Hi, white friends, just a friendly reminder that we should be kindly correcting others as they slip up. It doesn't have to be rude or aggressive, but it does need to happen. Every time you see or hear something wrong, a Black person does not, I think it's supposed to be, need to be on their last breath in order for us to speak up. Do it immediately, do it softly, do it kindly. If we do not stop these, oh, not so bad jokey comments from being perceived as such, and now they will grow to be much, much worse. And the only thing we need is is compassion." So she posted that. I thought it was really good. As a white person, she posted this saying, look, this is our job. As white people, we need to make sure that we are speaking up when we see something wrong. We need to be doing it in a way that people can hear, softly, but kindly, but immediately. And the blocked out piece at the bottom there was an individual that was a friend of hers. And he said, "I've checked everyone's privilege for them. Everything's good." And then she said back to him, "I know this was probably meant as a jest. However, a white man commenting about checking everyone's privilege on a racially charged post are exactly the kind of comments that got us into this spot to start with. not trying to be an you know what? I didn't even realize that she utilized a curse word here, not to be a explicit. But if we're trying to grow and correct behavior, this one isn't great. I checked with her before I use this as an example, but I think this is a really good example of utilizing your privilege in a moment, not letting it go, but doing it softly, not being angry about it, because as we can see, when two people are really angry, nobody can hear each other, but saying it in a good way. I was really proud of her when she said that. So I asked if I could use it as an educational tool, and she did give me permission to do it, but I will definitely be taking out that explicit. I apologize for that. I wanted to go back to the beginning and link this up. Why do we begin with the land? For me, as somebody who is looking to enact sustainable change within this country, it needs to start with understanding the treaties and relationships that came before we all got here. And recognizing those and honoring those and doing our best to live up to those in every way that we can. I mean, you know, the dish with one spoon wampum is a beautiful expression, and we all need to do our best to do what we can to live up to that. The two-row wampum, same thing. All of these treaties do not expire, and we need to at least know what they are and do our best to live up to them. We need to know the truth of the land that we live on. I think there is a vast majority of people living all over Canada that have absolutely no idea how they were able to settle on that land and what was lost so that they could. And I think that if we all knew the truth of that, then there would be a different understanding within this country of Indigenous people. And it's also to understand the relationship between Indigenous people and the land. We as Indigenous people are fundamentally tied to our land. As an Indigenous woman, you know, I've been told that one of my first jobs is to protect Mother Earth, because we both have that ability to bring life. We have that tether to each other. And I take that very seriously. It is something that you see a lot of the time when you see land defenders. There's women on the front lines. Our life, our sustainability, our culture, our language is so vitally tied with the land that if you want to understand us, you have to first understand that relationship. These are some of the last thoughts that I have on allyship. Again, these are things that I came up with when I was a brand new, bright-eyed instructor. I came up with these two slides, and I think that they still hold up. You let me know. This first one is very academic in its thought process. The second one is more sort of actionable. It says authentic allies resist individual product-driven constructs that exploit Indigenous peoples' language and culture. Allies are those who recognize their privilege and are willing to use that privilege to assist others. Being an ally requires a need to be of service without allowing personal need to get in the way. And it expects, an ally expects resistance and recognizes it is not personal, but a byproduct of historical harmful research and engagement. So this is more of the actionable pieces. As an ally, you will get it wrong. You will make a mistake. It's not the end of the world. Recognize it, apologize for it, never do it again, and continue to try. You will experience pushback and disengagement. This is not necessarily your fault. Keep trying. We all need to know the truth before we can begin reconciliation. Since 2015, and I think many of you have heard me say this, since 2015, this country has tried to skyrocket to reconciliation, but we are doing it at the detriment of the truth. We cannot reconcile anything until we have a full and complete understanding of the truth of this country. It's not always going to be pretty. It's not always going to be comfortable. But until we have a foundational understanding of that truth, we cannot move to reconciliation. And then finally, the last piece here, I did not coin this phrase. I wish I had, because it's wonderful. Nothing about us without us. If you are going to be, doing something around indigeneity, around any culture, having those individuals involved at the point of inception and all the way through is fundamental to its success. The hard part, you will be uncomfortable, but become comfortable in the uncomfortability of it. You will be denied, it's not your fault, you will get it wrong, apologize, correct, and keep going. It can be scary, difficult, and tiring. This work is some of the most tiring work I have ever done in my life, but it is the most important. My job by the time that I leave this institution, all that I can hope is that I have made this place somewhat more comfortable for Indigenous students. That's the whole point of my job, is to create a place where Indigenous students feel comfortable coming to learn. And that is because systemic change has begun. You'll probably feel like an outsider a lot. It's okay to feel like an outsider. Finding comfort with others that feel that way in the struggle is always really helpful. Recognize you only know what you know, and be okay with that. We don't need to know everything, and we are never going to know everything. And recognizing that we don't know everything is very fundamental to the humility of this work. We're over time, but I'm going to go really quick. Why do we need allies? Because of current social movements. We have, as Indigenous people, been trying to fix this for 500 years. We cannot do it alone. We know that. We need others in this help. Lack of funding for Indigenous student centers. Indigenous student centers are constantly every year trying to engage in funding, and it's becoming difficult. Knowing the history and the reality of what funding for many Indigenous organizations have to go through, it'll make your head spin. Take a look at it. Protest in I just got a text from, I'm going to out her. I just got a text from Lindsay that says, no need to rush. Thank you, Lindsay. Protests in Northern BC. I know that the protest in Northern BC in the Wet'suwet'en territory was all over the news a little while ago. Just because it's out of the news doesn't mean it stopped. They're still going, and we need to know these things. Just because it's not in our faces every day doesn't mean it's not happening. Changing the narrative takes all of us. There are very specific narratives out there about Indigenous people that we really need to start looking at and recognizing, and just our common linguistic patterning about things. There are certain phrases and certain words that are still used in very colloquial discussions that we need to start recognizing and not engaging with anymore. I recently saw something that was 10 phrases to stop using immediately, and I was not surprised, but I was interested, I think I will say, how many of them had to do with Indigenous people. Things like, we're gonna have a pow, if you're having a big meeting, well, let's just have a quick powwow. That is not okay. It's calling someone chief. That is not okay. Recognizing those things in just the simple linguistic patterning that we have will really start to highlight to you the things that we say colloquially that are not all right anymore. We can't do this alone. We've tried. I promise you, we have, as Indigenous people, tried very hard to do this by ourselves. We've tried to do it with a limited amount of resources and a limited amount of exposure to the greater Canadian society. We can't do it. We've tried. We are asking for those who give, who care to really start supporting us and taking up the emotional labor and the physical labor of this fight with us. But again, keeping all of these other things in mind. Finally, so I'm gonna out myself as a nerd here. When I was a teenager and still to this day, and do not judge me, love Buffy the Vampire Slayer. It was a show. It sits on a very specific place in my heart as an angsty teenager at some point in my life. And the creator and the person who created Buffy the Vampire Slayer, his name is Joss Whedon. He is a white man. He has gone on to do many other things, the Marvel movies, many things. I was listening to a panel discussion that he was on at a feminism rally, which is weird, but he is a very staunch feminism. He is a very staunch feminist. And as I was listening to it, he said these words, and it was one of those moments where it was just like, oh, that makes so much sense to me. What he said was, you don't have to hate someone to destroy them. You just have to not get it. We as a nation have not collectively gotten the struggle that Indigenous people go through on a daily basis. We, for the vast majority of Canadians, do not know the true history of this country, and how that sort of has perpetrated the systemic racism that we have and continue to see in this country. Not hating people, just not understanding them. So to me, to the way that I look at allyship, the first thing that has to come is education. And we cannot rely on public education to do that anymore. We need to take our education into our own hands. So that means following, if you are social media savvy, following Indigenous activists and authors and playwrights and directors and individuals on social media, reading Indigenous specific books, watching Indigenous specific movies, engaging with Indigenous specific content meaningfully and knowingfully, so that we can educate ourselves. I think that that's all I have at this point. I only went 8 minutes over. I'm very proud of myself. I would like to say Nyawa, Nyawa Goa, many layers of thanks. And I would like to pass it back over to Lindsay so that we can get into the question portion of this presentation.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Erin, for your presentation. I appreciate it. And I appreciate you working through the last few slides there at the end. So we have received a few questions. I'll also let everyone know that on the panel on your screen, there should be a spot for questions. So if you do have any that you'd like to submit, we can share them now with Erin. I think I saw there's a couple people with their hands raised. We're going to use the question function instead of having people ask their questions using your mics. So if you'd like to type your question in there, but we'll get started with a couple that have been submitted. So obviously at the end you discussed the fact that it's important to take education into our own hands. So we did receive, and actually it looks like there's a couple questions coming in with this, but some questions about, maybe we'll first start with adults, and you obviously spend your time, on campus engaging with classes at the undergraduate and graduate level. But for many of our participants who would like to learn for themselves, are there any books or authors that right now you can recommend? And we can of course follow up with a longer list. I'm sure you're sitting there in your office with some books, but is there any books you think that are great? There's some specific questions regarding books that share accurate history. We'll start there.
So I'm grabbing a pile of books that I'm going to begin to show, and we can definitely make a list of them for you. So the first one, if we're talking about accurate history and sort of going through and, here's what you've been told and here's the reality of it, there's nothing like this book here, which is The Inconvenient Indian by Thomas King. He is an amazing author. I laugh so hard when I read his stuff, but it's also very knowledgeable. He goes through, here's some historical pieces, but here's the reality of the numbers of settling North America, and I think it's a really, really good one. Then we have Tanya Talega's Seven Fallen Feathers. She does an amazing historical walkthrough of Northern Ontario and how we got to 7 dead Indigenous children from far northern communities in Thunder Bay, what it means to be a fly-in kid from a northern reserve who has to board with strangers to be able to go to high school. What does it mean for a community not to have high schools? And she also just came out with this one after her Massey series collection, All Our Relations. This one is a very hard read. This one goes into a lot, sorry, I'm covering the title. This one goes into a lot of information about systemic racism and intergenerational trauma and suicides within Indigenous communities. It's really good, but it's a hard one. This one here, I love this one. This one is Missing and Murdered Indigenous People of Canada by Jen Malpleasant. She's actually an alumni of Laurier. Most of what we see when we're talking about missing and murdered is women's stuff, which is very important, but we have to start talking about our men too. So this one is fantastic, along with this one, which is about Indigenous, missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls forever loved. This one, these two, I love these two. This is Kim Anderson's book, A Recognition of Being, Reclaiming Native Womanhood. It's fantastic. And then she just came out with this edited piece about Indigenous men and masculinity. Again, really amazing. And this cover, I can't even with this cover. How beautiful is that? Finally, The Creator's Game. This one is really great. It's also by a alum of Laurier. This is about lacrosse and the political ideology that it came up to that existed to create Canada's national game, which is lacrosse, and how they were able to get it from Indigenous people. And then this one is the last one, I promise. This one's called Separate Beds. This is about, if this is something you've never heard of before, this is about Indian hospitals, which was segregated hospitals specifically for Indigenous people. They sort of ran parallel with residential schools. If this is something that you've never heard of before, please take a look at it. It's very interesting. I'm going to stop there with the books.
So we'll definitely get your book list, Erin, and we will share it with everyone. Okay. And we can also share more resources after, but we have some questions, and I'm sure there's some folks on here either with children of their own or grandkids, and they're wondering, either books or good ways to start conversations. You've mentioned in terms of when you went to school, and I think I can say when I did, sharing the history of Indigenous peoples in Canada. It's a very specific way of sharing that and sharing a very limited knowledge. So is there any resources you can suggest for starting those conversations with kids?
Again, I'm going back to my bookshelf. I don't know if I brought any of those ones home, but there are quite a few age appropriate books that have been coming out in the last little while about Indigenous realities and residential schools specifically. So, as somebody who, and again, I'm going to out myself here, who was in public school in the late 80s into the, Lindsay's giving a face because she's like, oh, you're old, in the late 80s and into the early 90s, there was always that one class a year that a Holocaust survivor came in and told us about the Holocaust. And then we learned about it. We learned about it in an age-appropriate way. There are ways to learn about the genocide that has been and continues to happen in Canada in an age-appropriate way. So there are books like When We Were Alone. There is one called, I forget all of the titles. There's a lot of really great, I can see all of them. I can see them in my,
we'll get that.
Yeah, okay, that is a great place to start. There's also a lot of really interesting children and young adult content available on the National Film Board that is sort of age appropriate for those types of individuals as well.
Wonderful. So we'll definitely get that content from you, and we'll share out all the resources you're talking about. Someone has asked about getting the guidebooks that you mentioned early, so we also will link out to those. I'll just acknowledge that the two guides, the one from Laurier and the second more pamphlet guide, we will also share links for that. Mm-hmm. We have a question here that says, there's been information recently with Indigenous and Black fashion designers. I'm trying to think through that. If I buy a piece from an Indigenous designer with clear Indigenous representation, am I being supportive or am I appropriating culture?
So I think what you're talking about, what this individual is talking about, is the difference between appropriation and appreciation. Appreciation is what that individual did, went to an Indigenous designer, supported that Indigenous designer's livelihood, and purchased at a price that is fair for the work and the history and the culture that they have put into it. Through all of that knowledge has, that's the relational piece, right? What becomes problematic is when you go to and we call them trinkets and trash store. I grew up in Niagara, and there's a lot of those souvenir stores that we always called trinkets and trash stores. And there's always that one corner in a Canadian souvenir shop that is, the Indigenous corner. That's not okay. That is appropriation. When a fashion designer who has no links to any Indigenous communities takes visual representations of Indigenous culture and then makes money off of that, that's what appropriation is. One of the most often asked questions that I get is around Manitoba mucklucks, which is an Indigenous owned winter boot line, and they have expanded since then too. Is it okay for me to wear those? Well, yes, of course it's okay for you to wear those, as long as you are very aware of the history and the reality and all of the information that comes with those shoes, if you really make a point to learn about them, yes, that's fine. The fact that you're even asking the question means that you have given those things thought. It's really about the intentionality and again, the relationship building within those pieces.
Thank you. So I think we have a question here, obviously, and this I think goes back to your bio, but someone's wondering if you could explain what Turtle Island refers to. I think maybe the space and the...
I actually wrote that down earlier thinking that somebody might ask. So Turtle Island is the traditional name that many Indigenous people call what you would know as North America. Within my own creation story, the Haudenosaunee creation story, it comes from the whole, it's a very long story. When Sky Woman falls from the land above, she falls onto the turtle's back. And through the relationship building with the water animals, we get North America, which came up from the back of the turtle. And if you can actually Google this and take a look at it, if you look at North America and the way that it sort of curls around with Central America down here, it almost can look like a turtle. So we call North America, which is everything all the way down to Mexico, as Turtle Island. Now, not all Indigenous people of Canada say that, but it does come from our creation story.
Wonderful. Okay. So I think we have a lot of folks who are really thinking, I think as adults, if we want to educate ourselves, there are a number of resources. You can start Googling, as you mentioned, social media, different things like that. So I think people are really having some questions about educating children and grandchildren. And so, you kind of answered this a little bit with the books that you've mentioned so far, but we have a question about someone who has children ages 5 to 10 years old. Where do I start talking to them about being an ally and becoming more educated about being an Indigenous ally? For example, they wore orange shirts on Orange Shirt Day at school, but the school did not tell them why they had an orange shirt on that day.
Yeah, that's a very common one that a lot of schools have really picked up. And for those of you that don't know, Orange Shirt Day is in September, and it was started as a way to bring awareness to residential schools. And it's a beautiful story of this woman now who, when she was sent to residential schools, her grandma put her in this beautiful brand new orange shirt on her first day that she was sent to residential school. And the first thing that happened to her when she went was that shirt was taken away and she never saw it again. So it's become this representation of the stripping away of community and culture and family that occurred within residential schools. Recently, it has become a sort of, at least in this area, and I think mostly across Ontario and into Canada now, it's been this thing that public schools do and universities as well. They have stuff around Orange Shirt Day. But I'm very aware that not every school, it's also been linked with bullying, I think, at this point as well. So not everyone is given information as to how it connects with Indigenous people. Now, unfortunately, the way that our school boards run and individual classes and individual schools in the public sector is that there is no mandatory, at least to my knowledge base at this point, it's not mandatory. You get to choose if you want to focus on Indigenous culture or not. But as a parent, you have the privilege of saying, can you please make sure that next year you give some information about that? And here are some people's names that I know would be willing to connect with you to be able to share that information. That's the relational piece, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. And actually, I think that's a great segue into the next question that I have for you, which is, you've mentioned, I think many people, on this webinar, and I also know it's your familiarity would be from the Kitchener-Waterloo area. Of course, if someone's spanning down maybe into more of the Niagara, St. Catharines territory, I know you'll have a lot of information there as well. But you mentioned, nothing about us without us, and you've talked about if it's important to engage with folks within your area to provide that knowledge and folks who are Indigenous, right? So is there any suggestions you have for people? We talked about books, but I think everyone's starting their bucket list for when things reopen of where they can go, what they can do. So what maybe should people add to that bucket list? That's if there's Kitchener-Waterloo specific things, but if there's just sort of general spaces and places that people could research within their own areas to start to educate themselves, to visit, to support, to donate to? What suggestions do you have?
So that's actually, thank you for asking, because I have some written down here. There is, I'm not sure if any of you are aware of this, particularly right here, right now. There is a land back camp that is happening in Victoria Park, where Indigenous people have set up camp and are using that as a way to bring awareness to the lack of Indigenous ceremony grounds within this area that has traditionally been Indigenous territory. They have a Facebook page. If you want to go there and say, what is it that we can do? What do you need? Do you need food? Do you need somebody to come by and clean up for you? What is it? Do you just need me to tell people in my sphere of influence about that? Supporting these initiatives that are happening currently in this area is fantastic. Once we get back to normal, powwows are a great place to be able to go and engage with people and learn and get your face out there. It's again that relational piece. If you go stone cold to somebody, to an Indigenous person that does not know you, that's not necessarily going to be the best way to start those relationships. So the University of Waterloo puts on a powwow every September, I want to say, probably not this one, in Waterloo Park, and Conestoga College does one on campus at some point in the winter, I believe, as well. There's White Owl that you can always go to and reach out to them and say, hey, I want to help. What is it that I can do for you? But again, recognizing that the answers that you get might not be what you're expecting. It might be, can you drop off some water? And that's it. Being okay with that is part of the struggle as well.
Wonderful, thank you. I'll put a last call out here for questions. We're at 2:15, but what I will say while you may be sharing last questions would be that if you are taking your time today to think through all the information that Erin has shared, perhaps you want to do some research of your own first, perhaps you want to read into some other sources, please feel free following this lecture to send any questions to our email, which is lall@wlu.ca, and we can share those questions with Erin to provide you some feedback and some information if you have any further questions. Wonderful. So we have a question that has come in that time. We have the Indigenous Student Center at Laurier, which we are very fortunate to have on campus. I mean, campus is sort of slowly growing, so we'll say that the center is on campus. It is located on Albert Street, right across from the library and the Peters building. For any of you that are trying to visualize where that might be, if you're familiar with the Waterloo area. So someone is asking if you can comment on the soup and fry bread event, which I assume would be the Tuesday events at the Indigenous Student Center. And perhaps maybe that's from a perspective of sharing, what does the Indigenous Student Center do, and what's the importance of that event, and maybe the significance of that event, maybe I'll say, other than it's delicious. That would be what I would say.
Other than it's free food. So during normal campus time, during the fall and winter term, the Indigenous Student Center hosts a Tuesday between 12 and 2 soup lunch. So the first one of the year is always put on by the Indigenous Student Center, where they will come together and actually make huge buckets of soup, and then either fry bread or bannock. There is a difference. Please learn. Both of them have different, pluses and minuses. And then, give it out for free. And then the rest of the time, different organizations and groups and departments can sign up to also offer soup lunch. So I know that our department has done it in previous years, where you can either make the soup at home and bring it to drop it off for the Indigenous Student Center to serve, or you can go in and spend the day there and make it there and serve it yourself, or you can drop it off and come back later on in the day to serve it. It's a wonderful way of, first of all, supporting students on campus, because student poverty is a real thing. It's not every student, just because they're at university does not mean that they are able to feed themselves. So there's that. It's a way for individuals to be able to experience the Indigenous Student Center and to create community and to engage in relationship building. But it's also a great place to network as well. It's not just students that go, faculty go, staff go. I do my best to go when I have space and time, but you will see the same faces there, Tuesday after Tuesday. It's nice. You walk in, they give you a bowl of soup and some really like the most delicious bread you've ever had in your life. You sit down, you eat it, you give them your dirty dish, and you leave. And it's wonderful.
Yes, it is delicious. If you ever, when we return to campus, and you have the ability to join, please do.
Please feel free. And if you would like to sign up as a group to be able to offer soup as well, you just have to contact the Indigenous Student Center, and they will send you the sign-up sheet.
So we'll go with maybe our last question. If any additional questions come in, we can share them with Erin and get some of her responses and share them out with the group. The last question is about learning Indigenous languages. And someone's asking about trying to find resources to perhaps maybe learn Indigenous languages, and to educate themselves. But is there a chance that you could talk about maybe some resources, but also maybe talk about how Indigenous languages, are learned and passed on, and how you yourself learned, but how people might be able to educate themselves, but also traditionally how the language is passed on?
Yeah. So I'm gonna sit up straight again. I am a sloucher. What I've always been told about learning Indigenous languages is that it is a relational building thing. As traditional education was engaged with, it wasn't, like we think of education today. It was a real relational building thing. Elders and knowledge keepers would spend time with children and through trial and error, would pass down knowledge to kids, not through, the sort of Socratic, is that a word? The method, the banking model of education that we sustain today. So I've always been told, if you want to learn an Indigenous language, which unfortunately I am not fluid, the way that you do that is you create, again, relationships with people. There was last year, and I'm wondering if it's still going to be happening again this year, there was a Mohawk language course that was taught at Brantford. And because we are in this new normal where everything is virtual, it doesn't really matter what campus it's on. And as somebody, as somebody who is possibly in the lifelong learning category, you might be able to audit that class and learn as well. The Indigenous languages are, again, really tied to the land. When Lindsay introduced me, she introduced my nation, my heritage, which is Ginyagehaga. You might know that as Mohawk. That's not what we called ourselves. We called ourselves Ginyagehaga. What that means is people of the Flint, because we lived, our traditional home in the Finger Lakes region of upstate New York was on flint mines. We named ourselves, we identified ourselves by the land. So you will see a lot of those sort of things within the expression of our language. When I say Nyawagoa, that translates to thanks a lot, but really what it translates to is many layers of thanks. It's, thanks on thanks on thanks on thanks. It's the linguistic patterning is very interesting because it gives you a sense of what is important to a culture and to a community by the way that they, things are translated. Does that make sense? There are plenty of online resources as well. There is a wonderful thing called Think Indigenous that is on Facebook. They do a whole bunch of K-8 resourcing and live videos and language hubs and language hives and those sorts of things as well.
Wonderful. Well, I know that we have a few minutes before 2:30, but we're going to end our webinar there. So thank you so much, Erin, for joining us today and for your lecture. And thank you to everyone who joined us as well. If you enjoyed today's lecture, you can find additional learning opportunities on our website, which is listed here, including pre-recorded lectures from other fantastic law instructors. The resources that Erin mentioned today will be posted on the webpage for this lecture, and we will also send an email out to all attendees to let you know when those have been posted. If you'd like to learn more about the Laurier Association for Lifelong Learning, please visit wlu.ca/LALL, and you can feel free to email us at lall@wlu.ca. Thank you so much and have a great afternoon.